My name is Lucinda Verral, and at 72, I've learned that peace doesn't come from silence, it comes from precision. I spent 40 years as a landscape architect, a profession that taught me how to measure twice before cutting once, how to read the slope of the earth before trusting where water will run. Maybe that's why I liked the order of paperwork. Things behaved when you put them in rows. People didn't. That afternoon, I was at my desk, sunlight warming the edge of my oak table, filling out a transfer form for my daughter's honeymoon. Amara had chosen Santorini white cliffs, blue domes, a postcard life she said she deserved after everything. I didn't argue. Parents rarely do when their children name their dreams. I had the amount ready, $12,000 saved carefully from the pension I stretched like fabric that was never quite enough. The kettle clicked off in the kitchen, a small domestic sound that always reminded me of steadiness. I was about to sign the form when my phone lit up beside the checkbook. It was from Amara. Don't come to the wedding. Nathan hates you. It'll ruin everything. 12 words. No greeting. No explanation. Just the casual destruction of a lifetime. For a moment, I thought it was a mistake, an unfinished message, a fragment meant for someone else. Then I saw the little dots stop blinking. Conversation ended. I read the line again and again until the screen dimmed in my hand. My throat tightened, but no tears came. Just that slow, familiar tremor I used to get standing on scaffolds in winter, when you realize one wrong step could cost you everything. The bank portal was still open on my laptop. Confirm transfer. It said a neat blue button waiting for my approval. My fingers hovered over the mouse. Then I clicked cancel. The sound was so small it barely existed, yet it sliced the air clean. I sat very still. The house creaked, a truck passed outside. A pigeon flapped from the railing. Ordinary life continued as if nothing had happened. After a minute, I opened my drawer and took out the check I had written earlier. The ink was still wet. I tore it in half, then into quarters, and dropped the pieces into the wastebasket. The movement felt surgical, controlled, almost tender. When my husband was alive, he used to say, "You can't build anything that lasts if the foundation is cracked." I thought he meant buildings. Now I knew he meant families. I placed the pen back in its holder and turned off the desk lamp, though it was still bright outside. The smell of the canceled tea drifted faintly from the kitchen. I poured it out, washed the cup, and left it to dry upside down. By the time I returned to my chair, the phone was dark again, as if it had never spoken. I set it face down on the table. My hands were steady. My mind wasn't. Outside, the sky had begun to dim, with that soft gray Portland rain that turns every window into a mirror. In mine, I saw a woman still upright, still breathing, but hollowed by something she hadn't yet named. I folded the transfer slip, slid it into a manila folder marked personal records, and closed it carefully. The act was small but final. Tomorrow, I told myself I'd start writing things down, every expense, every favor, every time silence had been mistaken for consent. It was time to take inventory. The next morning arrived gray and damp, the kind of Portland drizzle that seeps through the smallest cracks of a window. I hadn't slept much. The kettle remained cold on the counter, the teacup I'd set out the night before, still waiting untouched. On the desk beside it, the torn remains of the check looked like pale leaves after a storm. I sat down slowly, the wooden chair sighing beneath me. There was no message from Amara. Not a follow-up, not an apology. The silence pressed heavier than words ever could. I opened the drawer again and stared at the folder I'd labeled personal records. The ink from the canceled transfer had left a faint mark on the paper beneath it, a ghost of generosity that had nowhere left to go. I pulled out a yellow legal pad from the side shelf. The first line I wrote wasn't planned. Things I've paid for. The list began awkwardly, as if my hand didn't know how to separate love from obligation. Amara's tuition 3 semesters at Oregon State. Apartment deposit 2012. Car loan 2016. Emergency credit card payoff 2018. The numbers surfaced faster than I expected. They had always been there, buried under motherly instinct and misplaced hope. Each figure brought back an image, the trembling of her teenage hand when she first received a debit card, the way she hugged me after graduation and whispered, "I'll pay you back someday." She never did, and I never asked. That was my mistake, not hers. As I wrote, I realized the pattern wasn't financial. It was emotional. Every time I gave, it wasn't money I wanted back. It was reassurance, gratitude, proof that I still mattered in a world that kept shrinking around me. The rain thickened outside, a slow percussion against the windows. I reached for the next sheet and wrote another header, things I never said. I filled the lines with small, unspoken moments. You hurt me when you laughed at my old jacket. I didn't like the way Nathan looked at me that night at dinner. I missed your voice last Christmas. The list went on until my handwriting blurred. When my husband Richard was alive, he used to warn me about this, how easily love turns into accounting. Kindness isn't currency, Lou, he'd said once, back when Amara was still in college, and money always seemed to leak through the walls. If you give to be needed one day, you'll wake up bankrupt in more ways than one. At the time, I had brushed him off. He'd never been the sentimental one between us. But that morning, his voice returned with startling clarity. He had known exactly where the cracks would form. I stopped writing and looked around the house. The framed photographs on the mantel told a history that no longer felt true Amara in her cap and gown, Richard standing behind her with one hand on her shoulder, both of them smiling toward a future that had since collapsed. I stood and took the photo down, setting it face down on the side table. The smell of rain mixed with the faint trace of chamomile from yesterday's cup. I finally poured fresh water into the kettle and let it boil. The whistle rose sharp and clean, a sound that steadied me. By the time I sat again, I had covered 2 full pages. The lists weren't complete, but they were enough. They turned grief into something countable, something I could hold in my hands. I tore the top sheet carefully and placed it inside the folder, pressing the edges flat. Then I reached for a new one, fresh and blank. This time I wrote a different title. From now on. The words sat there like a quiet declaration. I didn't yet know what would follow them, only that I wouldn't let anyone else fill in the lines for me again. The following afternoon, the rain had eased into a soft mist, the kind Portland carries like a second skin. I walked to the branch on Hawthorne, the one I'd used since Richard was alive. The same ivy clung to its brick walls. The same faint smell of polish and printer ink greeted me when I stepped inside. Everything looked familiar, which made the errand feel almost routine, except it wasn't. A young clerk with careful hair and a name tag that read, Clara smiled as I approached the counter. Her voice was polite in that way people are with the elderly, overly gentle, as if the air around me might crack. Good afternoon, Ms. Verral. I see you have a pending transfer for $12,000 to... She paused, glancing at the screen. Mr. and Mrs. Chase. Yes, I said evenly. I'd like to cancel it. Her eyes flicked up from the monitor, uncertain. Are you sure it's already cleared the preliminary verification? I can still stop it, but we'll need your signature on a cancellation form. I'm sure, I replied. Absolutely. She nodded, sliding a single sheet across the counter. The pen she handed me was slick and new, its barrel cold against my fingers. My name, Lucinda M. Verral, looked steady on the line, bolder than I expected. When I returned the pen, Clara offered a faint, professional smile, but curiosity lingered in her eyes. Would you like to leave a note for the recipient in case they ask about the reversal? No, I said a little softer. They'll understand. It was the truth, or at least a version of it that hurt less to say. She processed the request, stamping the form with a muted thud. I thanked her, folded the copy neatly into my purse, and walked back out into the drizzle. The air smelled of wet cedar and exhaust. My umbrella stayed closed. I preferred the feel of the mist on my face. Each step felt lighter, though I wasn't sure if it was relief or exhaustion. Traffic hissed by, and the city went about its business as if no one's world had just been rearranged. At a crosswalk, I caught sight of my reflection in a shop window. The glass blurred from the rain, but I could still see the glint of my wedding band, a thin gold circle I'd never taken off, not even after Richard died. It caught a fragment of gray light, steady and small, and I thought of all the ways we had tried to teach Amara about responsibility, about gratitude. Somewhere between lessons and love, she had learned only how to take. Halfway home, I stopped at a cafe I used to visit with her on Sunday mornings. The same owner was there arranging pastries behind the glass. He waved, asked if I wanted my usual. I almost said yes. But the idea of sitting at our old corner table felt unbearable. I smiled politely and kept walking. By the time I reached my house, the drizzle had turned into rain again, washing the sidewalks clean. Inside, the air was warm, faintly scented with cedar polish. I set down my purse, slipped off my damp shoes, and went straight to the study. The phone sat on the desk where I'd left it, still face down. I turned it over, scrolled through the contacts, until I found her name, Amara. Just the name, no photo. For a moment, my thumb hesitated over the screen. Then I pressed delete. The confirmation bubble appeared, asking, "Are you sure you want to remove this contact?" I whispered the same word I had said to the clerk, only quieter, meant for no one but myself. Perfect. The room was silent again, except for the rain tapping steadily against the window pane. I let it play its rhythm steady and distant, while I sat at the desk and placed the folded bank form into the folder marked Personal Records. It joined the list I'd written the night before, the start of something I didn't yet have a name for, but knew I would finish. Outside, a faint rumble of thunder rolled across the city, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't flinch. I simply reached over, switched off the lamp, and watched the rain blur the lights of the street until they looked like small, forgiving stars. That evening, the rain stopped, leaving behind a silence that felt too clean. The air smelled of wet brick and earth. I made tea, though I barely tasted it, and walked to the bedroom closet where the small gray safe sat, hidden beneath a folded quilt. It had been Richard's idea to buy it years ago for peace of mind, he'd said. Back then, peace had felt like something you could store in a box. I knelt and turned the dial. The metal clicked softly open. Inside, the smell of old paper rose like dust and memory combined. The first thing I saw was the envelope that held my wedding ring, the one I'd stopped wearing after Richard's funeral. The band lay coiled inside its surface, dulled with time. I slid it onto my finger for a moment, and the weight of it felt familiar, almost grounding. Then I took it off again and set it gently aside. Underneath were labeled folders, each one written in my own careful hand: Amara College Fund, Car House Loan, Miscellaneous Support. I pulled them out one by one and set them on the bed. The papers were meticulous, every transaction recorded, every deposit noted. I had always prided myself on organization, but as I looked through the files, the dates told a different kind of story. A quiet, relentless pattern. Tuition payments marked temporary assistance. Credit card payoffs signed for emergencies. Each page was evidence of how many times I had mistaken money for love, or at least for connection. Richard's handwriting appeared in one of the older folders, his notes beside the first college transfer receipt. Remember, Lou, help doesn't mean rescue. I traced the words with my finger, the ink, faint from age but still legible. He had said that to me so many times, half in exasperation, half in fear, that I'd one day give away everything we built. And I had, piece by piece. The realization didn't come as anger. It came as a kind of quiet shame, like seeing a reflection you'd chosen not to recognize. I had been so desperate to keep Amara close, to soften every disappointment she felt, that I'd trained her to see generosity as her birthright. It wasn't just her taking it, was me giving without boundaries. I found the receipt from the down payment on her first apartment. The note I'd written in the corner read, "Just until you get settled." She'd never mentioned it again, never offered to return a cent. I smiled, faintly bitter, not sad. The habit had been mutual. I'd allowed it because guilt had always been the currency I understood best. I gathered the folders back into a stack slower this time. The papers didn't feel like evidence anymore. They felt like confession. From the desk drawer, I took a blank sheet of stationery, cream-colored, the kind Richard used for his letters. I sat at the kitchen table, the light falling in a narrow stripe across the page. The pen moved before I decided what to write. Stop fixing what they keep breaking. The words came out sharp, uneven, but true. I underlined them once. For a long while, I stared at the sentence. It looked both foreign and familiar, like advice left by someone wiser than me. I folded the page, slid it into a plain envelope, and wrote my own name on the front. When I returned to the bedroom, I placed it inside the safe between the folder labeled Amara College Fund and the envelope with the ring. The two things that had once symbolized love and promise now framed a single reminder of restraint. I closed the door of the safe and spun the dial until the lock clicked back into place. The sound was steady, final, like the shutting of an old chapter. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, glinting faintly through the rain-streaked window. I stood there until the sky darkened completely, feeling the strange calm that follows a reckoning, a quiet balance between loss and relief. Then I turned off the light and let the room fall into stillness. It started with a whisper, one of those soft, pitying tones people use when they want to seem kind while twisting the knife. I was in the produce aisle at Winstead's Market, comparing pears, when I caught the tail end of a conversation two women were having near the oranges. Poor Lucinda, one said, not bothering to lower her voice enough. Losing her mind, they say. It's sad when it happens like that. The other clucked her tongue. Amara mentioned she's been acting strange, forgetting things, confusing people. My hands tightened around the cart handle. I stayed still, eyes on the fruit heart thudding so hard I could hear it over the hum of the refrigerators. They moved on their voices, fading into the shuffle of carts and distant music. But the words clung sour and heavy. I left the store without finishing my list. The rain had started again, steady and cold. I walked home under the gray sky groceries, forgotten the paper bag damp in my arms. Each drop felt sharper than it should have, as if the weather itself had chosen sides. When I reached the porch, Patricia was waiting by the railing. She lived 3 houses down, a retired nurse with kind eyes and the practical gentleness of someone who's seen too much to waste words. She raised a hand in greeting, but her face looked uneasy. "Lucinda," she said softly, "I've been meaning to talk to you." I unlocked the door, motioned for her to come in. The smell of rain and old books filled the living room as we sat. She hesitated before speaking again. "I heard something today. I wish I hadn't. It's about Amara." I already knew. My stomach tightened like a drawn string. "What did she say?" Patricia looked down at her hands. "She's been telling people you're not well, that you've been confused lately, sending her mixed messages, forgetting things. She made it sound like she's worried for you." A bitter laugh escaped me, small and sharp. "Worried," I repeated. I told her, "That didn't sound like you," Patricia added quickly. "But you know how gossip grows. Once it starts, it takes on its own life." I nodded, unable to find a proper answer. The betrayal sat deep, not because of the rumor itself, but because it was deliberate. This wasn't careless talk. It was strategy. After Patricia left, I stood at the window watching the rain blur the streetlights into trembling halos. I thought of the women at the grocery store, the way their voices carried so easily, like wind slipping through cracks. It wasn't just talk, it was erasure. If people believed her, my truth would vanish before I ever spoke it. I walked to my desk and opened the drawer that held the yellow legal pad. the one I'd used for my lists. Tonight, I opened to a new page and wrote a single heading at the top: Record of Events. Not a diary, not a confession, evidence. I wrote the date, the location, and every word I remembered from the market. The names of the two women I knew their faces from church. Then Patricia's visit, her warning, her phrasing. My handwriting was firm, my lines straight. The act steadied me. Each page became a small defense against the fog Amara was trying to build around me. I added a new note under the first, "If they ever question me, let them read my words." When I finished, I closed the notebook and slid it into the folder beside my earlier lists. The rain hadn't stopped, but its sound no longer felt like an accusation. It was steady, rhythmic, something I could measure and trust. I turned off the lights and stood by the window a moment longer. Across the street, the reflection of my own house shimmered in the puddles. It looked almost like a stranger's home, familiar, but unreachable. Then I drew the curtain shut. 2 days later, Patricia stopped by again, carrying a folded brochure she'd picked up from the community center. "They've started free legal consultations for seniors," she said. "You should talk to someone just in case." Her tone was light, but her eyes told a different story. That afternoon, I found myself at a small law office, tucked between a thrift store and a bakery on Belmont Street. The rain had stopped, leaving the sidewalks slick and shining like mirrors. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and old wood polish. A modest sign read, "Elias Drew, Attorney, Elder Law, and Estate Planning." He was already waiting in the small conference room, late 60s, gray hair neatly combed, glasses perched low on his nose. There was something steady about him, a patience that didn't feel rehearsed. "Ms. Verral," he greeted me, rising to shake my hand. Patricia called ahead. "Please have a seat." His chair creaked as he sat back down, folding his hands. I told him everything, the canceled transfer, the rumors, Amara's message. I expected disbelief, maybe sympathy. Instead, he just listened, nodding occasionally, the way a carpenter studies the grain of the wood before cutting. When I finished, silence lingered between us. Then he said, "You've done the right thing by documenting everything, but you need to protect yourself formally now, not just emotionally." He reached for a pad of paper and began listing steps in a deliberate hand. "First, revoke any old powers of attorney your daughter might still have access to. We'll file those notices today. Second, get a current medical certificate of mental capacity, not because you need to prove it now, but because you may, later." I felt something in my chest tighten, a mix of relief and humiliation. "You think she'd try to declare me incompetent?" He looked up gently. "It's more common than you think, Ms. Verral. Good people panic when money's involved, and some just plan." He continued, voice even. "Third, consider creating a revocable trust. You'd keep control of your assets, but make it harder for anyone to challenge them. I can help set that up." As he spoke, I watched the thin lines on his face, creases carved by years of other people's crises. Every word he said made sense, yet each one also pressed down on me another quiet confirmation that I was no longer just a mother, but a potential target. When he handed me the list, I took it carefully, as if it were something fragile. "You'll feel safer once this is done," he said. "Protection doesn't have to mean distrust. It just means you're not leaving the door open anymore." I smiled faintly. "I used to believe the door should always stay open. That's how most of us are raised," he said, leaning back. "But eventually you learn to install locks, not because you've changed, but because the world has." I nodded, feeling the truth of it settle deep. The rain began again, outside light, and persistent, tracing slow trails down the office window. He looked up and offered a small, reassuring smile. "When we're finished," Elias said, "you'll sleep better. That's my promise." By the time I left, dusk had settled over the street. The bakery lights glowed warm against the wet pavement, and my reflection in the window looked older than I remembered, but also steadier. I folded the list in my coat pocket and started the walk home. The sound of rain soft against the umbrella, like the rhythm of a clock counting forward, not back. It was near sunset when I saw the car pull into the driveway. Silver, polished, the kind that looked more rented than owned. I was in the kitchen rinsing a teacup when the headlights cut across the window. For a heartbeat, I thought it was Patricia again, but the outline of the woman stepping out made my stomach tighten. Amara. She carried a bouquet of lilies white and too fragrant, the kind florists wrap for apologies that have been rehearsed. She walked with that deliberate slowness she'd learned from years of trying to appear unbothered. When I opened the door, the scent hit first, sweet, artificial. "Mom," she said brightly, "you look good. I was just in the area." The lie landed softly, like a feather meant to distract. Behind her, Nathan sat in the car, one hand on the steering wheel, eyes fixed straight ahead. He didn't wave. "Come in if you'd like," I said, though my voice lacked the warmth I once used instinctively. She stepped inside, glancing around as if assessing changes. "It's been a while," she murmured. "You've rearranged things." "I made space," I said. The silence that followed was dense. She placed the flowers on the table and straightened them unnecessarily, buying time. "I wanted to talk." "I think you misunderstood my message." I met her gaze, calm and still. "Then correct me." Her practiced smile flickered. "Nathan didn't mean anything by it. He just thought it might be complicated having you at the wedding. You know how emotions can get." "Emotions," I repeated quietly. "Or appearances." She exhaled sharply. "Mom, you're reading too much into this. I just wanted a day that felt peaceful." "You've been different lately. People have noticed." The words were smooth, careful, and cruel. I recognized the tone. It wasn't anger. It was the strategy of someone building a defense before the accusation even arrives. "I see," I said. She tilted her head, testing for a reaction. "Patricia told me you've been talking to some lawyer about me." "I spoke with someone about my finances," I said evenly. "That's not about you." She laughed, a light, brittle sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, come on. Everything's about me to you. It always has been." There it was, the turn, the inversion, the familiar dance of guilt disguised as hurt. For years I had fallen for that tone, mistaking manipulation for fragility. Not tonight. I walked to the counter and poured the cold tea from the pot into the sink. The silence stretched. "I wish you'd called before coming," I said finally. "I thought you'd be glad to see me." "I was," I replied, meeting her eyes, "until you started talking." Her face hardened. "I came here to make peace." "No," I said gently. "You came here to rewrite the story." Outside, the car engine hummed impatient. Nathan shifted in his seat, but didn't move. Amara's voice dropped low, just above a whisper. "You're making things harder than they need to be. People are worried. About you." I looked at her. Really looked, her perfect hair, the tight jaw, the eyes that used to soften when she laughed as a child. There was nothing left of that now, only calculation and fear. "You should go," I said. For a second, she seemed almost startled, as if the word had come from someone else. She grabbed her purse, her movements jerky. "Fine. I was trying to fix this, but you clearly don't want that." At the door, she turned back, the lilies still untouched on the table. "I'll call you," she said, a statement, not a promise. I opened the door wider. The evening light spilled in muted gold and gray. Nathan looked up from the car, but didn't speak. "Drive safe," I said, and she hesitated for half a breath before stepping into the fading light. When the car pulled away, I watched the taillights disappear into the drizzle. The house felt neither empty nor full, just balanced finally. I turned back toward the table, picked up the bouquet, and set it gently in the trash bin. Then I closed the door slowly behind me. I understood perfectly. I said aloud, the sound quiet, but complete. like a verdict whispered to no one but myself. A week passed with quiet days that felt borrowed reading by the window, walking to the corner store, tending the small hydrangeas Richard had planted years ago. I had almost begun to believe the storm had moved elsewhere until the knock came. It was just before noon. The mail carrier, a man I didn't recognize, stood on the porch with a clipboard and a large envelope bearing the seal of Multnomah County Court. "Signature required, ma'am," he said. The paper was heavier than it looked. When I signed and closed the door, I already knew it wasn't ordinary mail. The return address confirmed it: Chase v. Verral petition for guardianship. I stood in the hallway for a long time staring at the embossed stamp. The air seemed to thin every breath, sharp. My hands shook as I opened it. The document was precise, clinical, typed in cold legal language that stripped everything down to allegations and procedure. Petitioner Amara Chase, née Verral. Purpose: appointment of temporary guardian due to early signs of cognitive decline in respondent. I read the lines twice, then a third time, hoping they would rearrange into something else. They didn't. The words sat there like stones. Early cognitive decline. It was such a polite way of saying, "You're losing your mind." The petition listed examples: confusion regarding financial matters, inconsistent communication, episodes of forgetfulness, lies dressed as concern. Somewhere between their wedding plans and that visit at dusk, my daughter had turned my sanity into a weapon. I called Elias Drew immediately. His assistant answered, and within half an hour he was on the line. His voice was calm, measured. "Lucinda, take a breath," he said first. "You're not the first parent this has happened to, though I know that doesn't help. It feels like an obituary," I said. "For the living." He sighed softly. "The petition means she's filed for temporary guardianship. The court will require a medical evaluation, mental capacity, financial management. If they think there's any risk, they can freeze your accounts until the hearing." "Freeze them. It's standard procedure," he said, though his tone carried a quiet anger. "But we'll respond. You already have your documentation, your records. What we need now is an independent medical report. I can recommend a neurologist who handles these evaluations. We'll make sure there's no room for doubt." The sound of rain started outside again, light, steady, insistent. I sank into the armchair near the window, the papers spread across my lap like evidence of a crime I hadn't committed. "I never thought she'd go this far," I whispered. "No one does," Elias said gently, "but you're not powerless. You have clarity, and you have proof. That matters." He gave me the name of a clinic near OHSU, Dr. Margot Heller, a cognitive specialist. "She's thorough but fair," he said. "Call her today. The sooner we get that report, the stronger your defense." After we hung up, I sat for a while without moving. The rain blurred the world outside the window into watercolor shapes. My reflection stared back at me faintly in the glass, older, yes, but not confused, not lost. "Just tired." I made the appointment that afternoon. The receptionist's voice was brisk, professional. "We can see you Thursday morning, 9 a.m., she said. I wrote it down in my planner, the same one I'd used for years. My handwriting was neat, deliberate, defiant. Then I gathered the papers back into the envelope and slid it into my folder marked Personal Records. It didn't fit easily. The file was already thick with lists, receipts, notes, and now defense. As I closed the folder, the edge of Elias's list peeked out. Revoke POAs. Secure documents. Medical certificate. I ran my finger along each line until I reached the last one he'd added in his looping script, "Stay steady." For the first time that day, I smiled. Small, unsteady, but real. Outside, the rain grew heavier, tracing lines down the glass like the world itself was marking testimony proof that I was still here, still aware, still mine. The clinic was quiet. The kind of sterile calm that smelled faintly of antiseptic and paper. I arrived early, clutching a folder too tightly against my chest. The receptionist smiled politely, but didn't meet my eyes for long. Names, forms, signatures, every step of the process made me feel like an exhibit being logged and tagged. Dr. Margot Heller met me at exactly 9. She was in her mid-50s, small-framed with silver hair pulled into a knot, and the kind of gaze that could both soften and pierce at once. "You must be Mrs. Verral," she said, offering her hand. "Please come in. This isn't a test so much as a conversation." Her office had no clocks, just framed prints of trees in fog, their outlines blurred as if meant to reassure the uncertain. I sat across from her while she flipped through a chart. "I understand there's been some concern raised by your daughter." I managed a small smile. "That's one way to describe it." She nodded once neutrally. "Let's begin with something simple." The questions started predictably. Dates, names, sequences. Spell the word world backward. Subtract 7 from 100, keep going. Remember these 3 words, apple, chair, river. Her voice stayed calm, professional. Mine did too. I answered each prompt without hurry. My tone measured my posture still. When she asked me to recall the 3 words again, I did precisely, even down to the order. As we moved on, I caught my reflection faintly in the window behind her desk. My face was drawn, yes, but steady. For the first time in days, I realized that fear had been replaced by something else. Resolve. At the end, Dr. Heller set her pen down. "You're remarkably lucid, Mrs. Verral," she said, with a note of quiet approval. "More organized than most of my patients a decade younger. I'll prepare my report accordingly." Relief came not as joy, but as breath, clean, unshaking. I thanked her and left with the faintest tremor of pride in my step. That evening, back home, I stood before the mirror in my bedroom. The rain had stopped, and the late light slanted across the room, softening the edges. I looked at myself, the lines around my mouth, the gray streaks that no longer bothered me, and began to speak aloud. "Mrs. Verral," I said, testing the formality, the poise. "Can you explain why your daughter might believe you're incapable of handling your affairs?" My reflection held my gaze. "Because she mistakes control for instability," I answered, calm and clear. "And because I stopped giving her what she wanted." I repeated it until the words carried no tremor. Each sentence became a small anchor. Each look in the mirror reminded me that dignity wasn't something others could certify, it was something I practiced, word by word. The next morning, Patricia came by with a batch of lemon muffins. She listened quietly as I told her about the evaluation. When I finished, she nodded, her eyes firm. "If they need a witness, I'll be there," she said simply. "I've known you 20 years, Lucinda. Your mind is sharper than half the people gossiping about it." I smiled, then truly smiled. For the first time in weeks, the house didn't feel like a fortress. It felt like mine again. I placed Dr. Heller's business card into my folder beside Elias's list and the note I'd written weeks ago. "Stop fixing what they keep breaking." In the mirror by the hallway, my reflection caught the evening light again, steady, composed waiting. The courthouse smelled of paper and floor polish, the kind of scent that clings to years of decisions made and unmade. Elias met me on the steps. His tie slightly askew, his briefcase tucked under one arm. "You remember," he murmured, offering a small, reassuring smile. "We speak only if asked. You stay steady. The documents will do most of the talking." I nodded. My hands were folded neatly over my bag, the same one I used to carry architectural sketches years ago. Now it held my life in folders and notarized proofs. Inside the courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined. The walls were bare except for the state seal and a worn wooden crossbeam above the judge's bench. To one side sat Amara Hare, perfectly styled, wearing a pale blue dress that probably photographed well. She didn't look at me. Nathan sat beside her, his jaw tight, his hands clasped too deliberately. When the clerk called our case, the words landed like the toll of a bell. Chase v. Verral petition for guardianship. The judge, a woman in her early 60s with a calm, weathered face, adjusted her glasses and began reading from the docket. Petition brought forth by Mrs. Amara Chase, citing cognitive decline and inability to manage financial matters. She looked up, her gaze sharp. "Mrs. Verral, do you understand the nature of these proceedings?" "I do." "Your Honor," I said. My voice sounded even. I was grateful for that. Amara's lawyer, a smooth, soft-spoken man with an expensive pen, began by painting a portrait of concern. He spoke of forgetfulness, of financial confusion, of a daughter's difficult decision made out of love. Nathan shifted slightly as he took the stand, his tone rehearsed. "I've seen changes," he said, looking anywhere but at me. She repeats herself. She's sent mixed financial messages. We just want to be sure she's safe. His voice was clean, almost convincing, but his hands betrayed him, tapping the rail, clenching, unclenching. Elias stood next, calm as a surgeon. "Your Honor, if I may submit into evidence Exhibit A, Dr. Margot Heller's mental competency report dated 3 days ago." He handed the folder to the clerk. "Exhibit B, financial records showing Mrs. Verrall's active management of her accounts, including recent legal revisions to her estate plan. Exhibit C, sworn statements from neighbors attesting to her soundness of mind." He paused, looking directly at the judge. "This is not concern. This is coercion dressed in affection." The judge took her time, flipping through the pages. The sound of paper turning was the only noise in the room. When she finally spoke, her tone had changed, measured but edged. "Mrs. Chase," she said, "did you attempt to access your mother's accounts prior to this petition?" Amara froze, then forced a soft laugh. "I just wanted to help." She gave me permission before Elias interjected gently. Permission which has since been legally revoked. The judge nodded slowly. "Indeed. And yet, records show an attempted transfer authorization dated last month. That's troubling." Amara's lawyer started to object, but she silenced him with a raised hand. Then she turned to me. "Mrs. Verral, do you wish to make a statement?" I stood, every eye on me. The wooden floor creaked under my heels. "Yes, Your Honor. I've made mistakes, too many of them involving generosity. But confusion has never been one of them. I know where every dollar came from and where it went. I may be older, but I am not lost." The room was silent for a long moment. Then the judge leaned back, folding her hands. "The court finds insufficient evidence to justify guardianship. Petition denied." The sound of the gavel was soft, almost merciful. I exhaled, slow and controlled. But before anyone could move, she added, "Furthermore, I'm referring this case to the county investigator to review potential misrepresentation and attempted financial fraud by the petitioners." Elias's hand brushed mine briefly, a quiet affirmation. Across the aisle, Amara's posture stiffened. Nathan's face went pale, his composure cracking for the first time. When we stepped into the hallway, the late light from the tall courthouse windows poured over the floor in amber streaks. I heard Amara's voice behind me, low and hurried, trying to calm Nathan. I didn't turn. Elias gathered the papers into his briefcase. "You did perfectly," he said. "No," I replied softly. "I did precisely." We walked out together. Outside, the air smelled of rain again, but it felt different now, washed lighter. I stood for a moment on the steps, letting the drizzle touch my face, while behind me the heavy courthouse doors closed with a deep, final sound. It began, as most poison does, with whispers. At first, it was just distance, the slow withdrawal of small courtesies. The woman who used to wave from her porch now turned away to rearrange her hanging plants. The cashier at Winstead's Market avoided my eyes. Even the librarian who'd known me for 20 years started speaking to me in the same careful tone she used with children. By midweek, Patricia brought me the version she'd overheard. "They're saying you've been declared unfit," she said, lowering her voice. That you fired your lawyer in a fit of confusion. That you're not yourself. I laughed softly, though it came out brittle. I suppose truth moves slower than gossip. She looked at me with pity and frustration, all tangled together. They're trying to rewrite what happened in court, Lucinda. You know that, don't you? I do, I said. And I know who's writing the draft. Amara and Nathan had found their new stage, The Neighborhood. They didn't need legal documents anymore. All they needed were conversations over coffee, hushed exchanges after church, and phrases that started with, "It's so sad, really." By Friday, it escalated. The knock came just after breakfast, a polite rhythm that carried official weight. A woman stood on my porch holding a clipboard and an ID badge clipped to her coat. Her name was Dana Royce, Department of Human Services Adult Protective Division. Mrs. Verral, she began with the gentle firmness of someone trained to handle both anger and confusion. We received a report expressing concern about your safety and living conditions. May I come in? The urge to laugh was strong, but I simply stepped aside. Of course. You'll find my house cleaner than most. She walked through, slowly noting each detail, the framed photos, the neat kitchen counters, the books arranged by subject and height. I answered her questions evenly. No, I hadn't misplaced any bills. Yes, I managed my own medication. No, I hadn't fallen or forgotten a stove burner. Half an hour later, she set down her clipboard. Mrs. Verral, I'll be honest, she said. I see this a lot. Family disputes that turn into exaggerations. You're fine, more than fine. I'll close this case as unfounded. Thank you, I said simply. She hesitated at the door, then added, If I may say, people like you make my job easier. You're clear, direct. Don't lose that. After she left, the quiet of the house felt sharper than before. It wasn't peace. It was exposure. I had been investigated in my own living room. That night I couldn't sleep. Every whisper I'd ignored replayed in my head. They were turning my life into rumor, my name into a punchline. And the more dignified my silence, the louder their lies would sound. Around midnight, I turned on the desk lamp and opened my laptop. The camera's small light blinked on a single steady eye. I adjusted it until my reflection filled the screen. Gray hair pulled back. No makeup, the lined face of someone who'd earned every year of it. I pressed record. My name is Lucinda Verral. I began, voice calm but steady. I am 72 years old. I live alone by choice. I am lucid, independent, and very much in control of my life. There have been rumors, ugly ones, but I am still here, still clear, and I am done with lies. I stopped the recording, listened to it once, then sent the file to the neighborhood group chat. My hands didn't shake when I hit send. Within minutes, the typing bubbles appeared. First, Patricia's message, proud of you, Lucinda. Then another from the librarian, good for you, people need to see this. A few others followed, cautious but supportive. Outside, rain began again, light and even. I stood by the window watching droplets streak the glass, reflecting the small green glow of my phone on the desk. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like the subject of anyone's story. I was telling my own, and in the hush of the rain that sounded like the beginning of truth, reclaiming its name. It was a Wednesday morning when the doorbell rang, 3 brisk chimes, businesslike, confident. I expected Patricia or perhaps a courier, but the 2 men on the porch wore matching gray suits and carried clipboards. One introduced himself as Mr. Tilden, the other as Mr. Krause, from Cascade Financial Lending. Good morning, Mrs. Verral Tilden, said his tone rehearsed. We're here to confirm details on the joint mortgage application you co-signed last month for Mr. Nathan Chase. For a moment, I didn't speak. The name felt foreign in that context, like a shadow crossing sunlight. I think you have the wrong person, I said evenly. I haven't co-signed anything in years. Kraus adjusted his glasses, flipping through a folder. This is your address, your full name, your signature. He turned the page toward me. There it was, my name written in a style that mimicked my hand but missed its rhythm. The loops were too tight, the pressure uneven. Someone who had studied my writing, but not my patience. May I see that, please, I asked, taking the paper. My heart didn't race this time. It settled into a quiet, focused beat. This isn't my signature. It's an imitation. Tilden frowned. So you're saying you didn't authorize the loan for Mr. Chase's small business venture? I'm saying this is forgery, I replied. And I suggest you don't process another cent under that name until you've confirmed it with your legal department. Something in my tone must have convinced them, because both men exchanged quick glances. Kraus cleared his throat. We'll need to file a verification. Could we take a copy of your ID? I retrieved my passport and held it beside the form. Here, I said. Compare them carefully. The difference was obvious. The signature in my passport was steady, deliberate, older. The one on the form looked young, impatient. When they left, murmuring apologies, I closed the door quietly, then stood for a long time with my hand still on the knob. I had expected Amara to try again. I hadn't expected Nathan to drag my name into something criminal. I called Elias immediately. He listened without interrupting, only the faint sound of pen against paper on the other end. When I finished, he said, "That's it. Now we have grounds for escalation." He guided me step by step. File a police report for identity fraud. Contact the bank to open an alert. Send him scanned copies for the counterclaim he'd already begun drafting. At the precinct, the officer on duty, a young man with kind eyes, took my statement carefully. When he reached the part about family involvement, he hesitated as if unsure how to write something both legal and human. It's my son-in-law, I said plainly. File it that way. That night, the house was still. I poured myself tea, though it had gone cold before I tasted it. The forged document lay on the desk beside Elias's list, the ink already curling at the corners. This time, I didn't feel sadness. What I felt was precision, the sharpness of something that had finally become clear. Betrayal had stopped being emotional. It had turned procedural, and that somehow made it easier to fight. The envelope came on a Thursday, thin but heavy with consequence. The return address read First Cascadia Bank Legal Department. I tore it open at the kitchen table, expecting another notice about the fraud alert Elias had initiated. Instead, the words, "Temporary restriction order pending risk investigation," stared back at me in bold. They had frozen my accounts. Every one of them. The letter was polite, bureaucratic, and merciless. To ensure the security of all parties during the ongoing dispute, access to funds has been temporarily suspended pending judicial review. I read it twice, then once more aloud to the quiet room, as if repetition might make it absurd enough to disbelieve. My savings, my pension deposits, even the modest trust I'd built for emergencies, all sealed away by the same system that had just cleared my name weeks ago. I called Elias immediately. He answered before the second ring. "You got the notice?" "Yes." My voice was calm, too calm. I thought we'd already proven everything. "We did," he said. But Nathan's attorney filed a parallel motion claiming financial volatility. The bank froze the accounts automatically until the court reviews it. It's a scare tactic. I could almost hear him pacing. "I'll file a motion to dissolve the TRO by morning," he added. "But you'll need to appear again. Can you manage that?" "Of course," I said. I'm not hiding from my own name. 2 days later, I found myself once more inside the courthouse. The same dull beige walls, the same cold air that smelled faintly of paper and coffee. Elias met me outside the hearing room, coat draped over one arm. "They're not expecting you to show up today," he said. "That's good." When the judge entered the room, quieted instantly. It was the same woman who had presided over the guardianship hearing, her eyes still sharp beneath silver-rimmed glasses. She looked tired, but alert, like someone used to sorting truth from drama. Elias rose first, submitting our motion. Your Honor, the respondent's assets were frozen under false pretext, following a dismissed guardianship petition and a confirmed forgery case now under investigation. We request immediate dissolution of the TRO. The judge turned to Nathan, who sat 2 rows ahead, hands folded too neatly, his tie slightly askew. Mr. Chase, she said, her tone clipped. This order implies there was risk of financial abuse or mismanagement. On what basis was it filed? He shifted in his seat. Your Honor, I was advised to protect family interests. We were concerned there might be, irregularities. By whom? She asked. He hesitated, eyes darting toward his attorney, then toward Amara sitting beside him. It was just precautionary. The silence stretched thin. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Chase, precaution requires reason. I see none in the record. She looked down at the file, then back up. Motion to dissolve granted. The accounts are to be reinstated immediately, and Mr. Chase, her tone hardened. This court will not tolerate further misuse of its process. The gavel struck once. Outside the courtroom, I leaned against the marble railing, the exhaustion hitting all at once. Elias handed me a folded copy of the ruling, his expression a quiet blend of victory and fatigue. They'll keep trying, he said softly. People like that don't stop until they hit a wall. Then we build one, I replied. He smiled faintly. You already have. As we stepped out into the gray afternoon drizzle gathered again over the courthouse steps. I didn't rush for cover. I let it fall slow and cold against my skin as the weight of the frozen paper in my hand began finally to thaw. It arrived in a manila envelope slipped under my door. No postage, no courier mark, just the seal of the county clerk printed on the corner. The first line, written in the flat diction of bureaucracy, made my breath catch. Notice of pending property, seizure review, under Title 46, Incompetent Estate Management. I read it. Standing in the foyer, the late afternoon light falling across the paper. It looked official enough to scare someone who didn't know better. For a few seconds, I almost didn't. Then my eyes caught the formatting incorrect spacing, a mistyped section number, a signature that looked like it had been traced from a scanned image. Whoever had sent this knew how to imitate authority, but not how to respect it. Still, the effect worked. My knees felt weak. I walked slowly through the house, paper in hand, touching the things that had built my life. The wainscoted walls Richard and I had painted our first spring together. He'd insisted on seaside gray, though we lived hundreds of miles from any coast. The corner by the window where the sunlight always found him reading the newspaper. The garden, visible through the back door, still lined with the hydrangeas that bloomed faithfully each June. I stopped there, watching the leaves shift in the breeze, and whispered to no one but the house itself. Not this one. Not this house. The quiet that followed wasn't fear. It was a settling, a kind of internal locking of bolts. I took the notice, laid it flat on the kitchen table, and dialed Elias. He picked up on the second ring. Talk to me. I told him about the document, every line, every signature. His voice darkened halfway through. Send me a scan right now. Don't touch anything else. When he called back 20 minutes later, I could hear the anger he tried to mask behind professional calm. It's fabricated, he said. Sloppy but dangerous. Someone used an old county form as a template. It's intimidation, Lucinda, nothing more. But we're answering it officially. I'll prepare a verification package tonight. What kind of package, I asked, though I already knew. The kind that ends speculation, he said. Original deed, current tax records, and your notarized competency certificate from Dr. Heller. We'll file it with the county recorder's office and send copies to every agency in the chain. No one touches your property again without crossing me first. I heard paper shuffling on his end. the clack of a stapler, the sound of order being built out of chaos. "They wanted to shake you," he added, "but this will do the opposite." After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table, the false notice still beside my cup of cold tea. Outside, twilight crept over the garden, tinting everything blue. I looked around the framed sketches, the worn wooden floor, the smell of cedar and soap still lingering from the morning's cleaning, and felt something shift in my chest. The fear that had followed me for weeks was gone. What remained wasn't gentleness. It was steel. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was testimony of work, of loss, of endurance. I folded the fake notice in half and slid it into a folder marked Evidence. Then I locked the front door, turned off the lights, and stood for a moment in the dark, listening to the faint hum of the furnace. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt fragile. It felt armed with truth, with record with me. The courthouse smelled the same as it had before, clean and cold like polished stone and withheld judgment. But this time, the air carried a different weight. The hearing room was smaller, quieter, almost intimate. Elias sat beside me, glasses low on his nose, papers neatly stacked in front of him. Across the aisle, Nathan whispered furiously to his attorney. Amara sat 2 seats away from him, shoulders rigid, eyes fixed on the table. The judge entered without ceremony. The gavel struck once. This hearing concerns allegations of forged financial documents and falsified guardianship claims. She began, her voice precise. "All parties are present." Elias rose. "Yes, Your Honor. We're ready to proceed." The handwriting expert, a woman in her 40s with gray-streaked hair and a measured voice, took the stand first. She held up enlarged copies of my signature from the alleged mortgage forms beside verified records from my passport and deed. The differences, she said calmly, are consistent with imitation rather than aging of the handwriting. The pen pressure spacing and curvature patterns confirm the signature was forged. The judge leaned forward. "In your professional opinion, was Mrs. Verrall's consent fabricated?" "Yes, Your Honor," without question. Nathan's attorney objected weakly, but the sound was hollow. The judge waved him down. I didn't look at Nathan. I didn't need to. The stillness beside him spoke louder than anger. Then came Amara's turn. When she rose, she looked smaller than I remembered, her confidence hollowed out. Her voice, once steady, trembled. "I didn't know she began. Nathan said it was just paperwork, something to help consolidate Mom's accounts. He said she'd already agreed that it was routine." The judge's brow lifted. "Did you verify that with your mother?" Amara's eyes flickered toward me, then away. "No, I didn't. I just signed where he told me to." Elias stood, his tone careful but firm. "So you participated in submitting documents that misrepresented your mother's consent without confirming her approval?" Her voice broke. "Yes." The silence that followed felt like air thinning out of a room. Nathan shifted in his chair, his composure cracking. "That's not true," he muttered too loudly. "She knew what we were doing. She was part of it." Amara turned to him, tears streaking down her face. "No, I wasn't. You said it would fix things." The judge's gavel came down sharply. "That's enough." By the end of the hour, the ruling was clear. Fraud confirmed. All claims, guardianship, property, embargo, and financial restrictions annulled. The court referred Nathan for criminal investigation. Amara received a formal reprimand and was dismissed from further involvement. When it was over, Elias leaned toward me. "You're free," he said simply. "Free." The word didn't feel like victory. It felt like something quieter, heavier, an ending that had taken too much to reach. As we left the courtroom, Amara stood near the exit, clutching her coat with both hands. She looked as if she wanted to speak, but no words came. I passed her without slowing, not in cruelty, but in mercy. Some conversations belonged to another lifetime. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky was pale, almost colorless, the kind of afternoon that holds its breath before winter. I walked down the courthouse steps, the echo of my shoes steady and certain, each one lighter than the last. Justice, I realized, didn't sound like thunder or applause. It sounded like quiet, like the world finally letting you breathe. Weeks passed before anything arrived. The days settled into a gentler rhythm. Early tea, pruning the hydrangeas, reading by the window as autumn rain painted the garden in quiet silver. I had almost stopped expecting her name to appear anywhere when the small white envelope slid through the mail slot one afternoon. It had no return address, only my name in familiar handwriting, round deliberate, slightly unsure, as if every letter carried hesitation. I stood for a long time before opening it. Inside was a plain card, the kind you buy in haste when you don't know what to say. In the center, a single line written in blue ink. "Thank you for teaching me respect the hard way." No greeting, no signature, but I didn't need either. The handwriting was Amara's older now, in a way that had nothing to do with age. I sat at the kitchen table, the card trembling slightly between my fingers. There was no apology, and yet there was one. It wasn't an olive branch, but neither was it a weapon. It was something else, an admission that the distance between us wasn't measured in miles, but in understanding, finally earned. For a long while, I just stared at the ink until it blurred with the reflection of the rain on the window. Then I folded the card carefully and stood. In the living room, Richard's photograph waited in its usual place on the shelf. Him in his work shirt, smiling faintly at something outside the frame. I slid the card into the drawer beside it. The two belonged together, the man who had taught me steadiness, and the daughter who had finally painfully learned consequence. Outside, the evening rain began again, gentle but persistent. I drew the curtains open wider and sat by the window, watching the garden lights shimmer through the mist. The hydrangeas bent under the drizzle, their petals bruised but still bright. The house felt full in a quiet way, not with voices or movement, but with endurance. There was no triumph in what had happened, no satisfaction. Just space, clean, hard-earned space where hurt had been. I breathed in the scent of wet earth, let it fill my lungs and exhaled slowly. Forgiveness, I realized, didn't require forgetting. It only asked that you stop carrying the weight. The rain softened to a hush, and the last light of the day lingered across the walls Richard and I had painted years ago. I sat there until the sky turned to gray, the garden lights glowing faintly in the mist, and whispered into the stillness, "It's enough." A year later, the rain returned the way it always did in Portland, soft, persistent, familiar. The hydrangeas had grown thick again along the fence, heavy with blossoms that leaned toward the light. Inside the house, the kettle sang on the stove, and for the first time in months, it was the sound of comfort, not routine. Patricia arrived first, brushing droplets from her coat, her cheeks pink from the chill. "I brought lemon shortbread," she said, lifting the tin like an offering. "Real butter this time, none of that low-fat nonsense." Lucinda laughed, the sound low and easy. Then it's already a celebration. A few minutes later, the two neighbors from down the street arrived, Jean and Mabel, the same women who a year ago had whispered at Winstead's market that she was losing her mind. Their faces were flushed with embarrassment when they stepped into her warm kitchen, but Lucinda greeted them without hesitation. "Tea's ready," she said, setting down the porcelain cups she and Richard had bought decades ago on their anniversary trip to Astoria. "Please sit." The conversation began awkwardly, full of pauses and half-apologies. Mabel finally cleared her throat. "We're sorry, Lucinda. We should have known better than to listen to talk that wasn't ours to repeat." Lucinda poured the tea steady-handed. "The important thing," she said gently, "is that you're here now." That loosened the air. Soon laughter found its way between the words. Patricia told a story about her cat's latest mischief. Jean reminisced about her husband's garden. Mabel confessed she'd started taking watercolor classes. It was ordinary, unremarkable, and that was what made it beautiful. For so long, Lucinda had lived as if waiting for the next intrusion, the next piece of paper that could undo her peace. But now, the house felt anchored again, alive in its quiet way. The trust was finalized, the legal wars long settled, the world finally still. When the rain began to drum harder against the windows, she rose to light the lamp by the porch. On the small table near the door lay the brass plaque she had made herself at the community workshop, each letter pressed by hand into the metal. She carried it outside, the cool air damp against her skin, and fixed it just above the doorframe. Welcome by respect. She stepped back to look at it. The letters glimmered faintly under the porch light, simple but certain. Behind her, laughter floated from the kitchen, warm and genuine. Patricia called out something about second helpings, and Lucinda smiled, turning on the light switch. The glow spilled softly over the rain-slick steps, illuminating the small garden path that curved toward the street. It was the same porch where she had once stood in fear of losing everything. Her name, her home, her sense of self. Now it felt like a threshold to something quieter and stronger than victory, the steady rhythm of a life rebuilt. Lucinda lingered a moment longer, watching the rain shimmer in the light. Then she went inside, closing the door gently behind her, the soft glow from the porch steady and sure against the dark.